On the 24th of February 2022, Russia went on the offensive in Ukraine. After nearly 1 year of build-up on the Ukrainian border, it seemed that Russia was keen on continuing what it had started in 2014. 1 month into this war, it is very obvious that things have gone horribly wrong for the Russians. So what has gone wrong? And why has it blown up in their faces when them being a superpower was expected to roll across Ukraine in the matter of days? Just in my opinion as a student of history and someone who studies this particular region especially, I'm going to give you, as I said, just my opinion on a few factors I think contribute heavily and all lead to a single point of failure. There are many paths to failure, and I'm going to go over several of those key points which I think are very critical to the situation.
Отошли, отошли от населенного пункта мошенники дали откат. Плюсом МТЛБ осталось там, разбитое. Прием. Журам 30, я Юг-95. Сили.
Before I dive any further into this, I just want to firstly say I am by no means stating that I'm an expert. I'm not claiming to be an expert, and I'm not saying that these opinions that I'm going to say are absolute concrete proof as what's going on over there. I'm merely a student of history, and in particular military history, and especially of this region. My interests in the last several years actually have been within previous Warsaw Pact nations and the Soviet Union and their military. So I am familiar with some of the politics, the history, and even up to that interest bringing interest to current military equipment and tactics of that area. So this is just from my opinion. Some of it is from my experience, but again, by no means am I stating that I am an expert in this field. As I mentioned previously, there are many paths to failure. I'm not saying that all of the points I'm making here are the absolute, concrete, 100%, these are exactly it and there's nothing more, nothing less. These are just things that I believe that heavily impact the efforts of the Russian military, and actually whether, for a large part, in my opinion, failing in Ukraine. So on the many paths to failure, this is one that I think has not a substantial impact, but a definite noticeable impact when paired with another point I want to make in this video. And that is corruption. This is something I've personally experienced, and you might be wondering, how in the world have you personally experienced corruption? Especially corruption within the Russian government and Russian military. How can you, living a world away, experience that? And it's very simple, my hobbies. Reenacting when I used to airsoft a lot, and just in general of liking to collect, and also my interest in Russian MREs, I've personally experienced this. And the corruption is quite simple. This stuff is not allowed to be shipped out of Russia, bluntly put. And it kind of starts something like this. You usually get a connection of someone that is either connected to or directly with the Russian military, or they have access to the stores or something along those lines. It starts simple. You send them a message, hey, I'm interested in the coolest thing you got. I want the newest, coolest stuff. What do you got? You'll get a message back, what size? Oh, I need a 54-5. A couple of days later, you get a return response, a picture of the item, a picture of the size stamp, just to make sure they got the right size, laid out right in front of you. That's what I want. And they'll say, hey, send it to my PayPal, or my buddy that's got PayPal, wire me the money, something along those lines. A few weeks later, it's in your hands. Same thing with Russian MREs. We've seen video footage of them eating MREs that went out of date in 2015. I've got Russian MREs sitting in this room right now that are good till next year. So you can see how that sort of impacts their logistics and impacts their supplies. And I'm not saying that reenactors, hobbyists, airsofters from across the world are directly causing the total failure of the Russian military. By no means. It is just a drop in the bucket, but it's definitely something that when you compare to likely them selling to other nations, other militaries, anything for personal profit, this is essentially what they're going for. And the corruption lies simply in that they're getting a hold of this for personal profit. They're likely paying someone to overlook them taking these items. And I would even venture to guess that there's probably someone within the postal system that they're also bribing and paying off to overlook it as well. So it's very obvious corruption does have some form of an impact. They're not getting the right food. They're not getting the right equipment. The AK-12s have no optics on them, despite them being designed specifically to mount optics. Like that's the whole purpose of that rail system on top of the gun. Now, it's just, again, a drop in the bucket compared to some other issues, and I'm going to go over a second part of this as to why they're not properly equipped. Corruption, however, I believe is definitely, maybe not a major factor, but a fairly large and noticeable factor going against the Russians in this war. Another path to failure, and this one's going to be fairly brief, just because, well, it just makes sense and nothing needs to be really pressed on it, is conscription. A large base of the Russian military is conscripted, and when you start putting people that honestly don't really want to be there, they're not signing up, they're not volunteers, you start getting low morale, the training isn't that great, and it has become something that is very obvious in this war. They really don't want to be there. They're not performing very well, and a large part of that, I believe, can be led to conscription. And if all the other paths to failure in Ukraine are made out of dirt or simply a path through the grass, through the snow, this path is paved. It is clear. It is absolutely flat, straight to the point. They underestimated Ukraine. They thought they could steamroll through there. They thought they could roll through their military. They thought that the people would welcome them. They thought by assigning certain terms to their objectives would give them support. It's obvious now, a month later, that is not the case. The Ukrainian people are putting up an amazing resistance against the Russian military, and they have absolutely devastated them. A war of attrition is going on, and even when the invasion first started, I kind of didn't have my hopes very high for Ukraine, just simply because we've been led to believe that Russia being a superpower and their military, and the stuff that they've showed us, the things that we've seen, that they would easily push through. Especially when you compare how Ukraine looked in 2014. Now, comparing those two situations, I think that the roles were reversed. Russia rolled into Crimea, they rolled into eastern Ukraine, literally, and for the most part, without firing a shot. And you compare how the Ukrainian military looked in 2014, they looked like they crawled out of the Soviet Union. They're rocking SSH helmets, old vests, 6B2, 6B3s, old equipment. Now you look at it, it's been 8 years nearly. The Russians still have the same stuff. The Ukrainians have all new stuff provided by the West. They underestimated how well equipped they were. They underestimated their morale. And most of all, they underestimated their ability to fight. And that definitely cost them. So this next path to failure I mentioned in my corruption portion. This is the failure to upgrade equipment across all of their battle groups. Now certain groups surprisingly they're well equipped. The Chechens, for example, that were fighting for the Russians before they left, were actually very well equipped. Their AKs had optics, their equipment would look brand new. But then you look at the standard Russian soldier. They're literally using essentially what was the same kit back in 2014. Yeah, there's AK-12s, but there's no optics on them. They're not carrying night vision. This lack of upgrading their forces has definitely impacted this whole war. They're using old equipment, old tanks, and you might argue, they're holding back for something else. They don't want to put all their best stuff out there. Well, you would think, especially with how the Russians are and how stubborn they are, that once this war started going poorly, they would have started pushing that in. And we did see some things like T-90s get pushed in, and of course they ended up driving them into rivers and getting them stuck in the mud, and then they were subsequently taken by Ukrainian farmers. But where's all the stuff we used to see in the parades, on videos, in video games even, you can argue, because it was known that they had this stuff, but it's obvious that it is in too low of quantity for general purpose issue. And that has caused a significant failure within the Russian military, I believe. The Ukrainians are well equipped, and they've been training for this moment for almost 8 years. They knew Russia was going to come in eventually. And then the drastic difference has shown. They're better equipped, they're better trained, and the Ukrainians have just been rocking the Russians in that regard. Equipment-wise, they've upgraded. As I said before, they looked like they crawled out of the Cold War, out of a surplus store in 2014. Now they look a lot more modern. Yeah, it's a hodgepodge of equipment from the West, but it's better than what the Russians got, and it shows. And the last point I'd like to make is that they lied to their own troops. They obviously had no clue what they were going to eventually go into. The stories that we see from the captured Russian soldiers have all largely been the same, especially in the early parts of the war and current invasion, of simply they thought they were going to go on training exercises, and they were told that they were going to go on training exercises. And then out of nowhere, they were told to follow a convoy and just keep going. And they were just completely unprepared, and honestly, I believe for a large part, unwilling to go into this war. Now they're kind of stuck with it, and we're starting to see the collapse of that. Just a news article today, Russian soldiers ran over their own commander. They're starting to get their morale absolutely crushed. Now there are some hardcore guys out there. There's going to be hardcore guys in any military, and obviously they're going to try to bring those guys in to fight the Ukrainians, but even those guys are getting smacked around by the Ukrainians. This obviously is something that will be learned upon in the future. You don't want to trick your own guys, because once they start learning the truth, they're not going to want to fight for you. And I think that in regards to morale, in regards to the situation of just the grunt on the ground, in terms of Russian troops, it's going to get worse for them. As they're getting their butts kicked, as they're losing their comrades, losing equipment, they're not well equipped, they're not getting fed, they're getting fed rations from 2015, so on and so forth. They don't have the support that they would require in order to be successful. I believe that more and more of them are going to end up turning and maybe even refusing to fight. So that is definitely a major impact, I believe, and probably among one of the top impacts to this failure of the whole war in regards to Russia. Obviously, all the paths that I picked for the failure of the Russian offensive in Ukraine is just a smaller part of the picture. War is a very complex thing, and so are the politics behind it. All of us in the world, we would prefer to see tomorrow, to wake up, to see peace in Ukraine, to see the suffering of the Ukrainian people come to a close, and rebuilding to begin, and peace to return back to the Russian and Ukrainian people. They share a lot of history together, and it's an absolute shame and truly a tragedy to see them fighting each other and guided by the misfortune and just overall insanity of Putin. So, where can we go from this? Like I said, there are many ways you can donate to help out the Ukrainian people. I personally have been pushing for donations to someone that's actively fighting there. Check my other videos out for that. And after COVID, all the other craziness that we'd seen in the world the past 2 years, everyone's rooting for the underdog, and that underdog is Ukraine. And honestly, well, the world kind of needed a hero. Within the motto of Ukraine is glory to the heroes. Well, I believe the world has definitely found their hero. Slava Ukraini.